Well, welcome everybody. This is episode 3 of the DCC Insider Podcast. I am David.
I'm Adam.
And today we have with us one of our favorite teachers at Catholic Central, theology teacher, Mr. Nick George. How are you?
Great. Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're going to dive into your time at CC, your time pre-CC, and then kind of the legacy that you want to leave with your students.
Awesome.
What drove you to want to maybe become a teacher? Like, is there kind of a story there behind that?
No, hopefully like a lot of us here at CC, I can think of great teachers and coaches that I had when I was in high school and people who made a difference for me. At the end of my years at Saline High School, just outside of Ann Arbor, I felt strongly convicted to pray about becoming a Catholic priest. And so, as a lot of my students know already, I spent a total of 7 years in the seminary, which is where you go to think about and pray about and study for the priesthood. And ultimately felt very strongly twice in my life that God was calling me to something in particular. And one time was when it was going into the seminary, and the other time was when I felt that for all those years had meant to me that God was calling me ultimately to marriage and family life. And so shortly after my time in the seminary concluded, I made a phone call to a priest I knew in the area, Father John Ricardo, and asked him if he just happened to know on a lark if any Catholic high schools in the area were hiring. And a day later, had a conversation with Mr. Kevin Walters here at CC. He asked me to send him a resume, and I said, absolutely, I'm away from home. I'll just give my resume real quick. And then I went home and Googled how to write a resume and went to myperfectresume.com. Interviewed the next day and was offered a job here the next week. So again, that was 11 years ago. And even during my time in the seminary, I always felt a lot of passion for teaching, for speaking. And so it dovetailed just so easily that this would be a career, a job, but also a vocation as a teacher and as a coach that would be the right fit.
Can you tell us about your time in the seminary?
Absolutely. My original seminary experience was in Minnesota at a school called the University of St. Thomas. And unlike a lot of seminaries, it's not a monastery, it's not sequestered, it's not away from the typical college experience. So while I was a student at St. John Vianney Seminary and at the University of St. Thomas, we would go to all of the football home games for our St. Thomas football team. Some of my classes were just with seminarians, with young men thinking about the priesthood. Other classes were on campus with pre-law, pre-med majors, people of every different background. And so our life in the seminary kind of grafted onto our college schedule. Before our daily classes would start, we would have an hour of prayer together in the mornings, followed by Mass. We would come back together in the evenings and have prayer together, followed by study hours, time spent with seminarians from our home areas, from Michigan, from elsewhere. And ultimately that I was also on the cross-country and track teams there. So it was very much a college experience in many ways that then was sort of bracketed by the seminary program before I came back here to Detroit to a seminary called Sacred Heart, which is much more of a fortress in the city of Detroit, not part of a larger university or college, and continued my studies there.
So with that in mind, did you have kind of a discipline to become a teacher when you were, in the seminary? Were there classes that you took that would be education based or?
Yeah, and I would guess we could reverse engineer from the classes you've had with theology teachers, since there's no state accreditation for teaching religion or teaching theology. Most of us pursued master's degrees in theology, and we've studied our subject. And again, most people who go that far in studying theology are people of faith and people who very much are convicted. But again, there's not a ton of how do you manage a classroom, how do you design assignments that are meaningful. And so I'm sure the guys in the room here have had different experiences of, some theology teachers say, read this chapter of the Bible and write, 1,000 words about it. And some of us feel like, okay, that's one way to do an assignment. And, so it was really only later that I learned in many ways just by failing and by trial and error, and then later studies about what we'd call pedagogy, how to be a teacher in the classroom. And again, usually there were days where I walked into class thinking like I'll just talk about this thing for 5 minutes and then we can move on. And the 5-minute subject became 45 and a half minutes and we went past the bell. And of course, like any teacher could tell you, there were days where I went in saying like, okay, I've got 17 things to cover. There's no way I'll cover all of it, but at least I have 45 minutes. And then 12 minutes later, I've covered everything on the page thinking like,
what am I gonna
oh, it looks like it's a study hall or I'll do a dance for you. That's a long way of saying that a lot of my sense of what to do as a teacher, to design assignments, to design classroom experience, that only came later.
So you were really thrown in on the fly in some respects, right? And put into a position of, managing a group of 17 to 30, even in some cases, high school students, which is not an easy feat in any manner. So.
Well, no, but it's, again, we have so much here at Catholic Central, that a whole language and a whole vision that defines our life, that that it's felt like just another aspect of our life here at CC, and the way that our school operates.
Are there any moments through your past 11 years that really stick out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I had so many athletic accomplishments. Some of us can think back to, again, not even ones that necessarily I was involved with, just watching Catholic Central shut out Cass Tech on the bitterest, coldest day that I can think of in my lifetime, and making our way to the state championships this year. That year, again, moments in the classroom where real curiosity kind of shone through. And as you guys know from class, there's nothing that's more ideal for me than a day where I get to throw out the script and say, well, it looks like there's some interest in this subject. Let's cuss and discuss about it for a little bit. So yeah, again, without thinking of too many benchmark moments that I can put a year to, I would say my proudest moments are typically, and it's a cliche, but just seeing guys walk across the stage after 4 years here at Catholic Central, or guys who transferred in after a couple of years here at Catholic Central. Just that it's a privilege to be a part of these relationships, and obviously a critical time in the lives of so many young men, and I would say year over year, just to be a part of graduation at Hill Auditorium, I think that again and again is a highlight, that it's a gift that doesn't stop giving.
Yeah. And you have a really unique perspective too, because you get to see young freshmen when they come in their first couple days at CC, and then you get to see seniors their last day leaving CC, and you teach all different courses that kind of range throughout all 4 years, I believe, correct?
Yeah, and it varies year to year, but absolutely.
Of course,
yeah,
varies year to year. So that has to be a really special, as you just said, too, a very special opportunity to watch these students change, come in 14, 15-year-old and leave 18-year-olds that are ready to take on college and things after.
And I definitely see it, and we just had class this past semester, Adam, and I see it definitely in abstract reasoning, that freshmen come in and necessarily, and you can read a book about developmental psychology, and you can just see things have to be so much more concrete, drawing general principles or kind of more abstract proposals. That's a challenge that really stretches freshmen. So I've really enjoyed coming back around, especially the junior moral theology class a couple times over these years, the senior class, the comparative religion, ecumenism class, that you can see the jump of critical reasoning skills, and of again, given how much I love to throw out the script and have a conversation about big questions, it's fun academically, it's fun intellectually to be able to then take that step up in conversation. And it's also fun, especially just to step into relationships. A lot of students, I think, underestimate that as teachers, we love not being treated like we're just standing at the whiteboard for the other 23 hours of the day, just waiting for you to come back so I can just vending machine dispense more information. But again, it's a privilege. And there are guys, maybe it's as a for instance, one of my first students, my first day as a teacher, when I was pretending that I knew what I was doing. Unlike now, where I pretend a little bit more effectively that I know what I'm doing. One of my first students now is engaged. He's 25 years old. He's getting married this May. And my wife and I have been the mentor couple for him and his fiancée. And we meet with them, and we are helping them think about what it looks like to be married and what their marriage is going to look like. And again, that feels like, even just in 11 short years of teaching, like a full circle moment, even beyond the 4 years of growth and of change, that again, I really look forward to a lifetime of those kinds of relationships, so many of which started right here.
What does having a family play into, because it's a big sacrifice, to be a teacher here and then to be involved in as many sports as you're involved in, and coaching and training and such. How does having a family play into that? Because it is a big sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that of all jobs, teaching can be more family friendly than some people expect. I think especially given some of the technological solutions we have, that there are so many things that for me are much more streamlined now than they were a few years ago. For better or for worse, there are so many things that I can do more efficiently, that I don't have to see my life as a teacher as taking away from my family or taking away from precious hours in the evening. And again, just the opposite, just the the chance that I have here to bring my children and my wife and my family into the life of the school. They love going to football games when they can stay up that late. They love, even a couple of weeks ago, it didn't work very well for my two of my sons to stay home while I was coaching a session with the wrestling team. And so for 45 minutes or an hour, my sons came. They were just old enough that I don't have to worry about them dropping a barbell on their foot or anything. They kind of know their way around a little bit. So, in between sets, I brought in a huge inflatable football guy, and my sons were just throwing footballs with some of the wrestlers and trying to hit the target. And again, even at their young age, they really look forward to being a part of the school and ask about it constantly. And so I'd say really now, for the ages that they are, my 3 sons and even my 6-month-old daughter, and into the future, we have this privilege that our school is so open to families, and to see other teachers bring their children in on those days that it works, and on drive days, and on days that that my sons have off of school, they're here too. So again, I don't see it as being in competition, and really our life here really enriches my family and vice versa.
That's really special. And my mom is a teacher, and I can remember being younger and how amazing it was, like going to school with her when we had a snow day maybe, or when we had a day off and she didn't have a day off, right? And being able to go in and just experience that and walk around kind of like you're the king of the school, and in some ways, right? So that's really special, I know, for the kids too.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I know you said you had like a calling to the seminary and to like teaching theology. So did you always grow up religious, or was there like a moment in your life or like that drove you towards your faith?
Absolutely. I would say growing up, my family, we didn't not go to church. We attended church on the other side of Detroit, on a regular basis. When I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, my parents divorced, and so of course that's going to involve some moving around and some changing of relationships. And again, we didn't not go to church after that. We kind of went, here and there. By the time I was in middle school or high school, we really weren't attending church with either sides of our family. And again, it was in high school through, again, people who I could name, that were an enormous influence in my life. The cross-country coach when I was in high school was also the youth minister at our local parish. Some of the guys that I knew from my classes and on my team were also very much involved in St. Andrew, the local church in Saline. And so really not through anything necessarily clearly supernatural, the writing in the sky or anything like that, but just through these relationships, I got involved in the youth ministry at our local parish and started going to Mass just with a friend and his family. They would come and pick me up on Sundays and drop me off afterwards. And so I would say it was through the course of high school that faith became more a part of my life, and then eventually the kind of force that I felt drove me eventually to the seminary and towards marriage and family life and towards my vocation now.
So we've gotten through, some of the more heavy topics, the family type topics. There's a question I think that's on every CC student's minds about you being at CC and such. And, when the freshmen come in, one of my favorite things, being on student council and such, is we get to walk the freshmen around on their first day of school.
Right.
And when the freshmen come in, I usually end up in the U by your classroom, and you always basically know every single student's name when they walk through the door on their first day. And that's a really special thing, I think, for those students, because they're in a big school. They're lost. They're freshmen, right? And this is a chance for them to kind of have a friendly face that guides them into the classroom in the morning. And how do you memorize everybody's names before they come into school?
Yeah, I would say in that case, maybe the legacy has exceeded the reality. It takes me time, and some guys I know from summer weight room programs, and from... if my wife was a teacher at a middle school in Brighton, St. Patrick's, so sometimes there are guys I know kind of through various avenues, but it usually does take me some time to get to know guys' names. It sounds kind of, I don't know if it sounds pandering or cheesy, but, for me, the motivation, you know the names of your parents, you know the names of your siblings, you know the names of your cousins and of your friends. That's not considered a feat, and, you can't love what you don't know, and you know the names of the people that you care about. And so I hope, at least, not as a parlor trick or as like a sleight of hand, but I hope as a real gesture of honor, that learning guys' names, in which case, in my case, I fail over and over. I can think of at least one freshman this year. I've asked him his name 6 or 8 times, and every time I say, oh, that's right, we've done this already. So by forgetting very frequently until the the critical mass of guilt grows enough that I eventually remember. But really I just feel motivated that I can think of times where being called by my name was enough to change the trajectory of my day, my week, my life, and to be known by people that you look up to. And that's really enough for me to make that a priority.
Is there a hidden set of note cards under your desk?
There is, absolutely. Yeah, you figured it out. I just cross my legs in front of me, and I have a little note card on my ankle that reminds me.
Oh man, have you ever had any fun moments in the classroom where either it's just something that stood out to you, looking back now, game or a test that just didn't go the way that it probably should have, but it turned out to be kind of a.
Well, maybe one answer I could give, it's typical across all levels of my class, freshmen and then seniors for your class this year. Typically, on the day before any test, we'll play Jeopardy. Okay. Again, I even all the way back to my first year as a teacher, as I was grasping at straws, trying to figure out how to do things in the classroom, I think I just Googled and found a PowerPoint slide, a presentation that you could just put your own questions in. And again, I think I probably used the exact same format. I don't think I've ever changed it in 11 years. Maybe I should, actually, now that you mention it. But I find that really fun. Yep. And again, I've seen guys get pretty animated in their discussion of sensitive theological topics and are close to cussing each other out about getting answers wrong. And again, I'm not sure. That's we'll see how God looks on that, in the judgment. But again, in the meantime, it's fun to get competitive in the classroom and to at least see guys have an avenue to be motivated to learn and to compete. So I usually look forward to those days, and they're usually a lot of fun. So again, it's over the years that's been a real highlight in the classroom.
Nice. Yeah.
Is there a legacy that you want to leave at CC with your students behind?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of my convictions over the course really of the past 10 or 15 years, as I've been involved with a number of different things in different kinds of teaching and youth ministry and men's groups and athletic endeavors and so forth, one thing that stands out is a lot of times the brand name or the structure or the organization falls apart, and I can think of things that I've been a part of where they don't exist anymore, men's groups or youth groups or clubs or teams that they don't exist anymore, that you can't sign up for them anymore. But the relationships they still endure. So just actually tomorrow I'll be in a wedding, I'll stand up in a wedding for a good friend, and the other groomsmen, by and large, most of them, plus the guy I've known since I'm a little bit older, I've known since they were in middle school, high school. We've been a part of some of the same, men's groups and outreaches, and again, some of those don't exist anymore. But the relationships are still that these men come back together, and it's just more meaningful than I can say that these relationships have endured. So again, that's a long way of saying, long after I'm not in the classroom anymore, or regardless of the win and loss record of the JV white hockey team that I worked with in the fall, or the success, of various career, just all of that, for the relationships to endure, and I hope, again at best, for the impact to endure, academically, intellectually, but even more in character. Again, without overestimating one's own impact, you really hope and want to strive for just leaving the greatest possible impression you can, so that people, young men from the school, can look back and say, that was somebody who really changed the direction of my life.
So one question I had was, I know a lot of kids, when they go into religion class, and people who struggle with their faith, they always struggle with the balance between faith and reason, like blindly believing something, and
absolutely,
why does this happen? Like, how can you explain it? So how do you balance faith and reason in your classes and while you're teaching?
Yeah, I would say at least three things. I think the first thing is that the Catholic conviction is that there are beliefs we have that stretch our reason to the absolute limit, that there are things that are beyond our ability to fully understand, and that's an extremely healthy thing. If you feel like you've got love all figured out, again, try dating somebody for real and actually having a committed relationship, and you'll find out that you're gonna find your logic kind of stretched beyond what you might have started with. So I think the first thing to be able to have in the classroom a healthy sense of mystery, or to be able to answer most questions, as maybe you remember I do, a lot of questions I answer with, I have to say right off the bat, I don't know the answer perfectly, and nobody could claim to know the answer. Why does God let bad things happen to good people? There's no rhyming phrase, there's no syllogism that could perfectly articulate a question like that one, the answer to a question like that. So I think to allow for some room for struggle and for questioning, which is true for me, and I think is true for anybody in a class like that. I think the second thing, allowing for some of that mystery and some of that space, the second thing is to try to frame things up as reasonably as possible, meaning to appeal to every source of knowledge that we can have, to realize the limitations of, the claims of science, to realize the limitations of the language of faith that we have. I think just to, as much as possible, try to frame a conversation and let's examine the evidence. Let's go as far as we can, like we would in any other subject, and whatever the logic and the evidence points to, let's go for that. Just like any hypothesis that you'd find, just like any historical study, let's follow the evidence, see where it takes us. And I think all that being said, and I hope you won't take this the wrong way as current students, but I think sometimes there's a question behind the question. And so maybe you raise your hand in class and you say, well, why would God allow bad things to happen to good people? But the question behind the question might actually be, why has God allowed bad stuff to happen to me? Or my mom is very sick right now, and this is not an abstract academic question. This is personal. And again, the classroom might be a place where it's not necessarily the place to reveal and be vulnerable at every last difficult thing, but at least in my mind, a lot of times it's more than just, I have this question, it's just a passing thought, it's just an intellectual issue, and then we can move on. But again, we're talking about the most important claims that we can make, the most fundamental convictions that a man could have. And so, of course, there's some personal stake in it. And I think to realize that it's not just an abstract academic issue, but for most of us, if we're asking big questions, that there's often a question behind the question, and it's more than a merely intellectual issue. And to allow for that, to allow for the fact that we're all human, and to say, great, that's a great question, and I don't know everything that's going on in everybody's life, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about the claims that we have of faith and open up a dialogue.
What do you think, the role of theology could play on a global scale today with our world if everybody, believed in faith and believed in God? Do you think that our world would be a much different place? Yeah.
As we probably talked about again in the classes you take, of course I don't believe that there should be a law mandating church attendance. Again, I think a lot of
God
people...
gives free will, right?
Absolutely. In a law, any good law has to be reasonable, has to be enforceable, and that's not... So, again, maybe to bracket something I wouldn't say is I don't believe that it's even possible to compel faith or to compel goodness or to compel really anything from people. It usually doesn't work, even if it's a good goal in mind. And there are so many people, and I'm one of them, who lament the loss of faith, the loss of perspective, that there are so many people struggling, and we as Christians fundamentally believe that to live a life where God is at the center doesn't eliminate all struggle, but orders everything and brings our lives into the right perspective. So that being said, I do worry sometimes when I see political solutions, military solutions, when I see people who are grasping for a way to fix what they see as broken, but in the absence of what we as Catholics believe to be truth, we look to the government to solve our problems, and we think, well, it's the government's job, for example, to make sure that nobody suffers ever and nobody is poor ever. And again, it's an admirable goal, but we really, when we elevate, well, maybe G.K. Chesterton said it best, that when we don't believe in God, it's not that we believe in nothing, it's that we'll believe in anything, that we would look to any possible source to fill the void that so many people are trying to grasp for meaning, for depth, for immortality. So again, all that being said, maybe it's bland to put it this way, but as a teacher of theology, I believe that this is true, and I believe that this is for everyone, and that God has intentions toward the human race that are for our well-being and for our joy and for our happiness. And all that being said, I would want the world to be a place where everybody knows that, isn't compelled to that, isn't somehow strong-armed into okay, fine, I'll believe that. So again, the ideal in my classroom at least, and I think in our school and beyond, is an invitation to faith. And like you said, Adam, not to believe because it's like a warm blanket and it's just so much nicer to believe. Because in a lot of ways, to believe challenges us fundamentally beyond our own sort of preconceived notions of the world and expectations of ourselves. Again, the role of theology, I believe it's an invitation to everyone to consider the most important questions of life, and we ultimately believe those questions that are answered by God alone.
So how do you think theology can contribute to discussions of morality and like ethics?
Yeah. So even just in recent days in conversations with some of my colleagues in the theology department, we might say something like, without God, you can't have morality. And I think there are a lot of voices, maybe even our school, who would say, well, I don't necessarily believe in God, and I try to be a moral person. And again, I have no disagreement with that. I can think of a number of atheists, of people of different faiths or of no faiths that have the most admirable ethical standards and moral kind of convictions. And so I would say, without reducing religion just to being a nice person, being a good person, serving others and so forth, I do fundamentally believe that there are so many questions and there's so much perspective on our lives that it's difficult to consider unless we have the broadest possible perspective. And at least as Christians, as Catholics, as people of faith, we believe that God, the Bible, that the faith itself provides the broadest possible perspective for us to consider choices and actions and moral difficulties that we might not even realize are decisions that we're making, or things that used to be thought about differently, or that our society maybe tends to have a polarized notion of. And so again, I would say a matter of perspective, zooming out to the broadest possible view of life and of humanity. I think that faith can give us a perspective that we might otherwise miss. And we also believe that ultimately, besides being a loving Father and besides Jesus being our Savior, we believe that God is also all-encompassing, that God is absolute justice, that God is, in his very nature, absolute goodness. So even if you don't believe in God, if you hold yourself to a standard of right and wrong, we believe that you're coming into contact with God even if you don't realize it. It's like, well, I'm an atheist, I don't believe that. Like that, fair enough. But if you care about justice, if you look out at the world and you say racism is wrong, or war is something we should avoid, in some sense, we as Christians believe that you're tapping into the very nature of God when you say that, maybe in ways that you don't even realize, because God is more than just some idea of a guy in the sky with a beard, but that God encompasses all of our ideas of truth and morality, and that anything we say with regard to right and wrong, whether we realize it or not, has some reference back to God and who God is.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us today, Mr. George.
David, Adam, thanks so much for having me.
Special conversation.
Sure, appreciate it. Thank you.
What homeroom are you in, just in case any students want to continue the conversation?
I'm in homeroom 117, right in the U. It's just to the heart of the school. I'd welcome that anytime.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Mr.
you both.
George.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you soon, okay?
Thank you.